level airplanes are. It does it itself. Okay?
Yeah, you're right there with me though.
Every time I open the hangar door to go flying, I realize that I'm one of the lucky guys doing something that I dreamt of as a kid.
Wow, what a nice crowd this morning. My name is Connie Boland. I'm the founder and coordinator. Actually, Kyle Guyett does most of the work now, but I take the credit for it. So I'm the coordinator for Warbirds in Review, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to day one of Warbirds in Review here at EAA AirVenture. On behalf of EAA Warbirds of America and myself and the entire crew, I thank you all for being here. I see a few familiar faces who hear most every presentation. We certainly have a nice group of aircrafts, and one gentleman here who's going to come on front stage here is fine. We're not very formal here, so that's fine. This year marks the 20th year that we have presented aircraft through the generosity of the owners and the maintainers of the aircraft. So this year, once again, we have a great lineup for you. And we cannot start this without saying thank you to those who make this possible, the volunteers, the aircraft owners, again, the maintainers, all the people who make it possible, who always answer my call and say, sure, we'll bring the airplanes, sometimes going to extraordinary efforts to make that happen. So today we start out, again, the 20th year that we have done this, thanks to Scott's Miracle-Gro Company, who is our sustaining sponsor for Warbirds in Review. Jim Hagedorn, Scott's Miracle-Gro Company, we could not do this without them. Ron and Diane Fagan, who presented us a very nice building behind us here, they are the sponsors and gave us the Quonset hut, which is our production room, and a meeting room in the other end of the building. Maybe someday it'll be a museum, but for now, today's first program, our moderator is going to be Sam Bass, my good friend Sam Bass, who has been with us for many, many years, doing a great job. Sam flew in the Air Force and again, he flew the EA B-17. He's done a lot of really great things, so he's one that knows a lot about aircraft and will be our moderator for the program this morning. And we have an introductory video that will introduce you to the gentleman who will be our first speakers. So if you could direct your attention to the Jumbotron, and we'll do the intro video, and then Sam will take over.
The Navy's first ace was Naval Aviator number 85, David Ingalls, in 1918. Flying a British Sopwith Camel for the RAF, he shot down 5 German airplanes in 6 weeks. Plane design and production proceeded unstopped for the next 20 years, and by World War II, naval aviation had become a power to defend our way of life, particularly in the Pacific Theater, after the surprise Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. Just 4 months later, in April 1942, Jimmy Doolittle led 16 Army Air Corps B-25 bombers from the Navy carrier Hornet in a daring raid. They accurately and successfully bombed targets in Japan that sent a strong message to the Japanese leadership. The message: you made a huge mistake bombing America. Navy planes dominated in the Pacific War. Fighters, the Grumman Cat series, the Wildcat, the Bearcat, the Tiger Cat, and the Hellcat. Hellcat pilots shot down over 5,000 Japanese airplanes in the Pacific. And the Helldiver that replaced the Dauntless. There were PBYs and the Kingfisher spotter and rescue planes, and of course, the 400-mile-per-hour Corsair. The Corsair was one of the most successful fighter planes of World War II and very effective later in the Korean War. Most of its fighting in World War II was in the Pacific Theater against the Japanese. The Navy flew the Corsair from aircraft carriers, the Marines from island airfields. It was an air-to-air fighter, it was a ground attack aircraft, and escorted on bomber missions, protecting them from Japanese fighters. The Japanese called it whistling death because of a distinctive sound the Corsair made at high speeds.
Today, we have a Corsair sponsored by Jumbo Lair Aviation Community and owned and operated by the American Honor Foundation. It is newly painted in honor of U.S. Naval Aviator Charles Joseph Obie O'Brien. Growing up building models, hanging out the airport, and devouring aviation books and magazines, Obie took to the skies at 9 years of age in a Ford Trimotor in 1937. Flying was in his blood. In 1946, while Obie graduated from prep school, the Navy started a new program for potential pilots, known as the Naval Aviation College Program. Passing all the necessary exams, he was eligible to attend a college with a Naval ROTC program. He enrolled in Villanova College and was also sworn into the Navy on July 18, 1946, as a V-5 apprentice seaman. After spending the required 2 years in college, Obie reported to Naval Air Station Pensacola, Florida, where he trained in the SNJ and Hellcat. He earned his gold wings in June of 1950. Upon graduation, he reported for duty with Jet Training Unit 1 at Whiting Field, where he logged time in the Lockheed TO-1, the Navy's designation for the F-80C Shooting Star. Completing his jet training, Obie was assigned to a Corsair unit. As he says, go figure. Obie has over 7,000 flight hours in 52 types of aircraft and 735 arrested landings on 20 different carriers. He also held the honor of being the only pilot in the world actively flying the Corsair, like he flew in combat until he retired in 2013 at the young age of 85.
359 was my airplane. It had my name on it, and I liked it. Of course, I flew it 3 times in combat. It's been well taken care of. It's had 6 or 7 owners in the last 60 years, and it's just like a brand new airplane. When I got in it, a lot of nostalgia. Some of the instruments I didn't recognize because when I flew it, it was pretty basic. But the airplane smelled just the same. I certainly appreciate the past owner and the present owners taking care of my airplane.
Good morning, folks. Welcome to Warbirds of America 2020/21. We missed last year. We're going to have our pilot presentators here, 3 of them. I'm going to introduce you to them very shortly. We're going to have the video, fairly long video with Obie, and then we'll talk about the particular airplanes, and then if we have time, we're going to have a question and answer. So to start off, we have Charlie Lynch. Charlie, would you raise your hand there? And Charlie, he works in private aviation. He's qualified in numerous aircraft, including the Zero, the P-51, the Spit, the Corsair, these airplanes here. Then we have Mark Murphy. Mark's in the center here. Mark is a professional warbird instructor in the TBM, the P-51, the B-25, the T-28, the L-39, the Corsair, the DC-3, the Jap Zero, the P-40s, the Hellcat, Spitfire, and other airplanes. He's got 7,500 hours of flying time, and you've been flying Warbirds since when?
Since about 2005.
So when you were 5 years old.
Exactly.
Okay.
52 years old.
Yeah. Now we have Zach McNeil on my left here. Now Zach is a retired Navy, 20 years pilot for a major airline. He flies now for a major airline. He's an EA examiner inspector specializing in heavy helicopters and fighter training. He's a designated flight examiner, and he lists there's too many airplanes for even try, so we won't list them. Now, Zach, will you tell us a little bit about your foundation, and also at your end of it, would you go ahead and present our Obie O'Brien video, please?
Yeah, thanks. The foundation's name is American Honor Foundation. We started it last year, and you can tell we're rapidly growing our collection. The idea is to identify a type of warbird and a specific pilot that we'd like to honor that has done something that we think is neat or cool as a group. We started with a P-51. We got another P-51. We got the Corsair. We have the F-80C. We have an L-39 and a T-6, and we're still working on building our collection. As you can see, we'll talk a little bit later about the pilot the F-80C named after, and we're going to concentrate on the pilot Obie with the Corsair today. I want to mention, if you don't mind, the sponsor that let us come up here.
Please do.
Jumble Air. Anybody, raise your hand if you ever heard of Jumble Air. It's got a really eclectic past. It was recently purchased by our main sponsor for the foundation. It's been a zoo for elephants. It has a really unique, it's the longest privately owned runway in the United States, and one of the biggest tenants there is John Travolta. The current owner is redeveloping it. It's going to build some aviation estates there, and part of the our marketing campaign is to bring all these beautiful aircraft here and let everybody know about it. So if you're thinking about buying a nice estate down in Florida, in the Cala area, please come talk to us. We'd love to have you and help support the Warbird community. And finally, I had a few notes and facts to introduce Obie, but it was so brilliantly covered in the intro there. The one thing I do want to mention about Obie was he was on 3 different ships, USS Coral Sea, USS Lake Champlain, and the USS Boxer. He had 70 hours combat time and 22 hours of combat sorties, and I want to point out the obvious. It's very rare to actually have a combat veteran warbird because of how the aircraft, people didn't want to buy the ones with bullet holes. They bought the ones that were just coming off the assembly line. So we have an actual aircraft here. Afterwards, I'll be standing. We have the actual chart that Obie used in the Korean War to fight with this aircraft. Of course, it won't leave my hands, but if anybody would like to see it, I'll show it to you later today, and we'll have some pictures up on Warbirds in Review. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our interview with Obie. So pay attention to the Jumbotron.
Ever since I was a little toddler, about 5 years old, I was interested in airplanes. We were vacationing in Ocean City, New Jersey. Fortunately, there was an airport very close to us. And I would go down there on my bike and hang around and talk to the people. And I saw a sign that says there's going to be a tri-motor Ford airplane here next week. And you can get a ride on one. So I thought that was a good idea. And the price for me would be $2.50. $2.50. I was only 9 years old. This is 1937. $2.50. I was a paper boy, and I got a penny a paper, so that was 250 papers I had to deliver to get that ride. So I went down there, and I got onto the airplane. We had about a 15-minute ride, and I came back. I had not asked my parents whether it was okay or not, because I figured that permission would be very hard, impossible to get, and forgiveness might be a little bit easier. So I took my ride, and then when I came home, I told my mother what I had done, and she was very, very unhappy. And I told her how sorry I was, but I got a good ride. My father just kind of smiled. That was the last ride I had until I joined the Navy and started Navy flight training. But that cemented my desire to fly. There's no doubt that what I was going to do later in life. I graduated from high school in 1946. In 1946, everybody in the Navy was, all the pilots, everybody was getting out and going back to school. The Navy saw that there would be a valley of lack of pilots during those years, and so they started a one-year program, which would, if you could qualify, get yourself into an NROTC college, pass all the aviation, the physical and the mental, pass the interviews, they would let you enlist as an apprentice seaman, send you to school for 2 years. I went to Villanova, by the way, for 2 years, $50 a month on books and tuition. And then following that, you would go to Pensacola, be sworn in as a midshipman, and go through flight training. I went to Pensacola in 1948, took basic flight training in the SNJ, qualified on the carrier in the SNJ, went down to Corpus Christi for advanced training, flew the Hellcat, the S6F, went through that training, qualified on the carrier in the S6F, and got my wings in June of 1950. In 1950, I was assigned to take jet training. The Navy had some F-80s, we called them TO-1s, single-seat jet, and it was only a month course, 25 hours, and I went through that and enjoyed flying a jet. It was a new experience for me after flying the SNJ and the S6. My first flight, I had never been in a tricycle landing gear. I had never been in any kind of a jet, even a commercial jet. And so it was quite a thrill to sit there, be able to see the runway clearly, and add the power and take off. It was quite a thrill. After completing the jet training, I went to talk to my detailer, and he said the Korean War had started, and they were starting a couple of squadrons down in Jacksonville, Florida. It was 4 Corsair squadrons, and they needed pilots. So guess where I was going? I was going to Jacksonville and fly Corsairs, which I had mixed feelings about. I would like to fly the Corsair, but I also would have liked to flown jets. But in the end, I think the best thing that ever happened to me really was to be assigned to Corsairs. I made 2 med cruises in the Corsair, flying the F4U-5, the first cruise, the F4U-4, the second cruise, and then we went to Korea flying the F4U-4. The skipper called us into an all-pilots meeting and said, guess where we're going, guys? Because everybody really was anxious to do our share. The West Coast pilots were flying, and we were going into med. We thought maybe we should be doing our share of the fighting. So we left Mayport, Florida on the Lake Champlain, which is a Essex type carrier, straight deck, of course, and went through the Med, through the Suez, and into Korea. We flew a line period from the Lake Champlain and cross-decked over to the USS Boxer, and they sent a jet squadron over to the Lake Champlain. It had something to do with the fuel capacity of the ships. On my first launch, we briefed in the ready room for a strike on a bridge. The bomb load was going to be a 1,000-pound bomb and two 250 bombs, and six loaded 50 caliber machine guns. We briefed very carefully the launch of four Corsairs. I was number 4. Went out to the airplane. At that time, I remember being a 25-year-old bachelor, hot to trot, ready to go out and break something. Really. So when I got in the airplane, you would taxi up to the deck launch officer. He would give you the wind-up signal after you gave him a thumbs up that your instruments were okay. You would add as much power as you could until you felt the tail just getting very light. When he gave you the signal to go, you would add full power, and that big 13-foot prop, a lot of torque, so you needed a lot of right rudder. And went off the deck. The ship would be making some of its own wind, at least 32, maybe 35 knots. You were too heavy for the natural wind in the ships. They would download you a little bit, but that didn't happen very often. In any case, when you went off the end of the deck, you would settle just a little bit. You would get your wheels up as fast as you could, get a little bit of speed, raise those flaps gently, and turn off. The flight that we had was on a bridge in North Korea, and it was heavily defended on both ends. I think there was also railroad tracks on it. We climbed up to 8,000 feet, saw the target, and we made individual runs. The leader went down, number 2, number 3, and number 4, which was me. By the time I got started in my run, there was a pretty heavy anti-aircraft fire. And I thought, oh boy. And coming down, I could see these orange, they look like tennis balls coming up at me. And I thought, and I could hear them as they went by the airplane go, woof, woof. And then I thought to myself, I'm seeing only about a sixth of the ammunition being released. But anyway, we would drop our bombs at about 3,000, the big bomb about 3,000 feet, and then we made 2 more passes to get rid of the other 2 bombs. And with each pass, it seemed like those tennis balls, those red tennis balls, I call them, were getting closer and closer and more. In any case, when I got back to the ship, nobody was hit. It was a good flight, and we did significant damage to the bridge. We came back, came around, we all got aboard safely, and when I got out, then I got scared. I was not scared I was concerned, but I wasn't scared until I got back in the ready room and said, oh boy, that was hairy. We flew both, I think of the 24 missions, I flew 11 close air supports missions. The rest were strikes. And when we couldn't do a strike, we would be set free to do what we called road recce. And anything in North Korea was moving, wheeled, we would shoot at. Okay. On one occasion, I got 2 boxcars, which was good.
Okay. Did you always fly number 4, or did you move up to an element lead or
No,
flight lead?
I was mostly number 4. I was only an ensign.
And you were one of the young guys in the squad.
I was one of the young guys in the squadron. We flew in sections, the leader and his wingman, and then the section leader, which was the last 2 airplanes. And that would be a more senior officer than an ensign or a JG. But that was my spot, which I liked. And I would try to, when we were making a run, I would kind of get off to the side a little bit or come in at a slightly different angle, because I knew that they had war sighted those first 3 airplanes, and I wanted to not be in the same flight path. The missions that I like more than the strikes were close air support. And the way that worked is after you would launch from the ship, they would shift you to a unit called Red Crown, which coordinated all the close air support missions. If somebody needed close air support, they would go to Red Crown, and then they would assign you a mission. I liked those missions because we could get down low. We knew that we were helping our troops. And that was very rewarding, and it was especially rewarding when you got a message from the ground that attaboy, and that was really good. We were controlled a lot of the times by an Air Force Mosquito, SNJ, and he would mark a target for us, and he would tell us what the results of our mission were. And I enjoyed that because I felt I was really doing something to help people. And when I got an attaboy, that made me feel great. They would mark the target sometimes. Okay, I'm going to put out a red rocket. And that's the target. Your target is so many feet from that. Okay, I see the red smoke, but then I look around and I see red smoke, red smoke, red smoke. Those rascals were listening to us. And it was clever. They had those things said. I guess they could do it by remote control, but it would, if you didn't know where the original smoke was, and you just came in, you wouldn't know what you were supposed to do. Yeah, I was flying missions, and when the war was over, instead of bombing, we would go out and fly our mission on the last day. Instead of going down, getting low and dropping the bomb, we did what I call dip bombing. You would fly along, drop the nose a little bit, drop your bombs, and get out of there. Nobody wanted to be the last one shot down. 359 was my airplane. It had my name on it. And I liked it. Of course, I flew it down in Jacksonville, and I flew it 3 times in combat. It was a good airplane. I liked it very much. And on the way home from Korea, we came back through the Med, and the Navy told us to drop off 2 of our Corsairs in Port Leote. I volunteered, since my airplane was going to be one of the put in the pool status. I volunteered to take it to Port Leote, and I flew it over there, and with the other guy, and we parked the airplanes, and we were brought immediately back to the ship as soon as we transferred the airplanes. That was the last time I saw that airplane until a couple of years ago. I found that airplane was still flying, and it was in California. Okay, after we got back to Jacksonville with BF-44, we traded in our Corsairs for Banshees, the McDonnell twin-engine jet. So I finally got to jets. A little bit late, but I got to them. I flew them for the next 10 months when I got orders to Pensacola to be an instructor. I was an instructor in Pensacola flying the SNJ, and from there I went to photo reconnaissance school, and came back to Jacksonville in the Photo Crusader. The Photo Crusader was just like the fighter, except it didn't have any armament. It didn't have any guns. It was unarmed. Every carrier had 3 of those Crusaders on it. We did the same thing that the satellites do now. I made 3 cruisers in the Crusader, and our squadron motto was alone, because we flew alone. We were unarmed, because we were unarmed, and we were unafraid. And I always figured 2 out of 3 is not too bad. After leaving the Crusaders, which was a fine airplane. It was the second best airplane I've ever flown. The Corsair was the best, and the Crusader was second best. I got orders to New York recruit aviation orientated officers. That would be the AOC, the crewmen, and the pilots. I did that for 15 months, went to the postgraduate school, finally got my degree, and then went to the USS Bonhomme Richard as the assistant air officer. The assistant air officer is the air officer in charge of all aircraft movements within about 3 miles of the ship and everything on the deck. Spent 15 months there, and then came back to Norfolk. And here I was assigned to a staff, Commander Fleet Air Norfolk, which had air stations and all the fleet airplanes aboard. I was operations officer there. And then I got orders to be 7th Fleet representative, 7th Fleet liaison in Saigon to everybody in Saigon. It was like the go-to guy for carrier questions. I spent 14 months there. I came back to Norfolk and finished out my tours as operations officer of Naval Air Station Norfolk. Meantime, I got attached. I found out there was a group in New York called the Sky Typers. They were flying SNJs, 5 SNJs, 10,000 feet. Center one had to fly line abreast. The center one had a computer in it which triggers smoke on all 5 airplanes, which let a dot matrix message across the sky. And that was a lot of fun. I flew with them for 24 years, 24 air show seasons. The fighter factory over in Suffolk had some nice airplanes, and they were going to build a museum is where we are. And they had the Corsair, they had a TBM, and they had a Sky Raider and a lot of other airplanes, the Mosquito. And so I wrote a very nice letter and told the Sky Typers I found a better deal, so I was going to fly with them. To get into flying the museum, I had plenty of flight time. I had heavy time, and they were looking for a couple pilots, particularly SNJ pilot. So I started flying the fighter factory's SNJ, and then they got the Corsair, and since I had a lot of Corsair time, I got checked out in the Corsair, and since I was checked out in the Corsair, I thought maybe I should check out in their TBM, and when I checked out in the TBM, I thought maybe I ought to check out in the AD, and I did, plus all the other airplanes. And then they built the Military Aviation Museum here in Virginia Beach, and we moved from Suffolk, from the fighter factory, moved everything over here. The surprise that you had for me was that my Corsair 412 359 was flying in California, belonged to a gentleman out there. And my friend Steve contacted him, and he said if he's qualified in a Corsair, he's more than welcome to come fly his old mount. And over the course of 2 years, there was delayed, and finally we set a date, and we went out to California, to Ramona, near San Diego, and I was fortunate enough to fly my old Corsair that I had left in Port Leote 59 years ago. The last time I saw the airplane in Port Leote, it had been well worn. It was tired. It had been at sea for 8 months, combat in three or 4 months, and it was needed a paint job. When I saw it in Ramona, they opened the hangar doors, and I saw a beautiful plane, just like it was off the line. It was shiny. It was painted up very nice. It had Jesse Brown's name on one side. He was shot down in Korea. And on the other side was Hudner's name. Tom Hudner was a pilot who landed next to Jesse Brown in an unsuccessful effort to save him. Hudner was later on presented with the Congressional Medal of Honor for that action. Unfortunately, Jesse Brown was not recovered. No, I thought about the people who had flown that airplane. In addition to myself, they were all retired or passed on, and all the fun we used to have in the squadron, and it just brought back memories of nice times and nice people, and times that I relish.
And I took a photo of you sitting in an easy chair with a bottle of cold water, and I remember the airplane was parked right in front of the hangar, and you were staring at it, and it seemed like you were a million miles away.
I was. I was a million miles and 60 years away. I got a call from you, Steve, about 2 months ago, maybe 3, and you mentioned to me that my airplane was no longer in California, but it was in Florida. And the owner, the new owner, wanted to paint it in its original colors from the F4U-4, and with my number 412 on it, and the squadron designations, the F on the tail, and the yellow wingtips and rudder, top rudder, and that's great. They're going to put your name on the airplane, and I was ecstatic. I understand that it was in the Bob Black Sheep series. It was in the Reno Air Races, and it's just like a brand new airplane. When I got in it, a lot of nostalgia. Some of the instruments I didn't recognize because when I flew it, it was pretty basic, but the airplane smelled just the same. So I certainly appreciate the past owner and the present owners taking care of my airplane.
We have our 3 pilot presenters here, and Mark is going to be our expert today on the F4U Corsair behind him. And first of all, Mark, tell us how you got into the Warbirds and when you started.
Okay. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedule. This is about my 20th time at Oshkosh, so it's an honor to be here. And I know it's hot, so if it makes you feel any better, people ask us what it's like to fly one of these airplanes. Imagine putting on your winter coat on a day like today, get in your car, and instead of starting it and turning on the air conditioner, you turn the heat on. That's about what it feels like. But anyway, how I got started in this, my father's here in the crowd. I grew up on a 4,000-foot grass strip, started out in the Piper Cub when I was 16, moved up to a Stearman and a T6, a P-51, and then started working for a few museums and got the opportunity to fly 11 different types of Warbirds, and then went on to become an instructor teaching other people to fly the P-51 and the Corsair. So that's where I got my start.
Tell us a little bit about the specs on the Corsair, please.
Charlie, go ahead. This one's his department.
That's a subtle handoff. And we're greatly honored to be able to present this plane today. And thank you very much to John and Dan Mosley and their crew at John's 360 Coatings, who not only painted this magnificent airplane, but their products help us keep it clean with a little bit of elbow grease. There were over 12,000 of these airplanes built, and I think the great history of this is this wasn't just a World War II plane. This was designed in the early part of the war and wound up finishing through Korea. So of those, you had airplanes built by Chance Vaught in Connecticut, you had Brewster Aircraft, and Goodyear, who actually built the most of them. And the number in various models, this is a Dash 4, which is a later model airplane. The difference between the early birdcage one, where people like our great friend Jim Tobel has a chance to fly, to this, it is night and day. It's just the difference is incredible. So we're fortunate to do this. Obie's presentation, for us to be able to fly a plane like this, and thanks to Steve Chappis, our good friend who introduced us to Obie, and to have the honor of flying a combat veteran with the history and still having the pilot today alive, Sam, is just a true pleasure, because as you pointed out, most of the Corsairs, the one we fly the most was a racing airplane. And so if you ask somebody the specs of a Corsair, it's sort of happy to tell you which model.
Well, how big an engine is this with that one?
Well, and Sam, so that's one of those things that this was the real difference maker compared to like the Zero that Mark and I get to fly. This was a beast. This is a 2,000 horsepower engine built by Pratt & Whitney, 2,800. And again, being Northeast guys, we have a little bit of pride because the plane was designed in Connecticut and originally built in Connecticut, but so too was the engine built by Pratt & Whitney up in Hartford and Hartsville propeller. So big engine.
Now, the propeller has a lot to do with the design of the wing, is that correct?
Very much so. So they had such a big engine with so much horsepower, the only way you can convert that engine power to thrust was this giant 13-plus inch or foot propeller. And to land it on a carrier, to have this clearance with this big prop, the landing gear would have to be massive, and of course it becomes a weak point and a point of potential failure. So some very genius people with slide rules, or forget computers and all that, figured out, if we just bend the wings, the gear can be shorter and stouter and take the punishment that you see with carrier landings. That's why we have the gull wing.
And one of the things about the armament, not a lot of people have been able to fly a Corsair with all the rockets and the drop tanks on it. And so a little quick story, when I went to pick up this airplane, Charlie went with me, and it came with all the rockets, the drop tank, but they were all in a corner, and we were deciding, okay, how are we going to get these moved? And we were going to box them all up, but then we got thinking, okay, this is going to be a pretty big box, so let's just hang it all back on the airplane the way it's supposed to be, and we'll take it with us. Well, we had no idea how much drag and weight that adds to the airplane. So I couldn't imagine, we fly it clean today and light. I couldn't imagine taking off on an aircraft carrier with full drop tanks, full rockets, full of fuel, and full of ammunition. It really had to probably be a big struggle because it's such a dynamic difference. It probably slows the airplane down 30 knots with all that drag.
Tell us, the mission for it could be either air to ground or escort. It could be a number of missions, but a typical mission on this airplane flying off the carrier.
It really depends. Are you talking early in the war or later in the war? One of the things that we really enjoy, and it's such a privilege and honor, is to be able to fly both a Japanese Zero as well as the Corsair. And I'll tell you, at some of the air shows down in a confined environment, sort of slow speed, that Zero will eat the Corsair's lunch every single time. It is a kite with a great big engine.
Well, I'm the pilot flying the Zero,
okay,
too,
so when he's
give me a little
flying,
credit.
the Zero is a better airplane. But with that said, as soon as we go somewhere, and we've heard pilots will sometimes play around as they're traveling places, we never do it,
we don't do that,
no.
of course.
But once you get above 200 knots, that stick in that Zero, it's like it's in concrete.
Yeah.
This plane will start an aerobatic routine at 310, 320 knots. You do that and pull back, and you just finger pressure all day long on the stick. So whether it's slow speed coming into a short grass field or high speed aerobatics, it's a delight to fly.
Well, speaking of the Zero, what's the kill ratio between this airplane and the Zero?
Well, not necessarily the Zero, but the number I know that overall it's about 11 to 1.
That's what I heard also.
It was designed as a Zero killer.
Actually,
Boy,
it killed more. It was 11 to 1 for that. It was 10 to 1 overall. So
overall,
it actually did better
Yep.
on the Zero.
In all fairness, one of the things is we look at the aircraft and how tremendous they are, But a lot of the unsung heroes was the training program that we had going versus what the Japanese and the Germans had. We were producing consistently well-trained, qualified pilots using a lot of the combat veterans coming back to share their experiences. The German and Japanese, you flew until you were wounded beyond ability to fly or dead. And so I think we had that long-term vision that helped us win the war, in addition to fantastic aircraft.
Now, the airplane was designed to operate off the carrier, correct, from the
That's
start?
Right, from the start.
Why did the Marines end up with it first and they weren't flying off the carrier?
The Marines will tell you because they were better pilots. I'm not a Marine. I respect them. The reality is, as much as the engineering was genius on the landing gear, there was a rebound, if you will, challenge with the landing gear itself. And so you could get some pretty substantial bounces. So they learned, they improved the gear. The British were operating them off aircraft carriers, and I think there's some new information now saying that Americans were also operating them before we think they were. But the common belief is that the Marines were operating off fixed land bases first. It's a sweetheart. It's a big, heavy airplane, but it handles well, slow, and low and dirty. It's the perfect sort of rough field aircraft.
Speaking of weight, what would they operate this thing in combat weight-wise?
Well, it's about 12,500, but I was going to go back to the landing characteristics on this. One of the unique characteristics about this is every once in a while, in a crosswind or whatever, you might have one strut collapse before the other, so the airplane will sit a little crooked even though you're traveling straight ahead. And most pilots, you want to compensate and turn the aircraft, but you can't. You have to just trust that the lock tail wheel is taking you straight down the runway. You might put a little bit of aileron in, and then eventually it'll collapse on you. But that if you try to overcorrect with this aircraft, it'll get away from you on takeoff or on landing.
Well, now you compared the Zero to it. How about other like aircraft, like the 51 or whatever?
So Charlie and I
not against each other, but the flying characteristics.
We fly most of our time as Corsair and Mustang. So we've got a lot of time in both. But as far as characteristics, they both fly pretty similar, except the Corsair is heavier, and the Mustang is obviously faster. So when we're out flying, I got to ask them to slow down because I can't keep up with you.
In the cockpit, I think the comparison is the Corsair is the muscle car of the airplanes.
That's a good comparison.
The Mustang is very refined, the Cadillac. The only thing is when it's hot, like Mark was mentioning earlier, the Corsair, you can open the canopy.
Now, let's just jump over the 51 here for a little bit. How about the specifications on it? Are you the expert? Who's the expert?
I'm not an expert in anything.
He's the expert flying it. Few people fly it better. The amazing story, and again, this is the American ingenuity and the industry stepping up to produce what we needed at the time. From the time that North American had that contract in hand to a first flying prototype was 102 days. You would never see that now. Airplanes are a little more complicated. But it was the North American team went back, and even in Washington, the night that they had those specs in hands, they went in and came up with the preliminary design, and then 102 days later, they had a flying prototype.
Now, the British got the airplane first, right, with the Allison engine?
Correct. Yep.
Well, tell about the conversion for the Allison to the Rolls-Royce.
The Allison down low was fine, but in Europe, the battle and Pacific, the battles were up high. So you needed a good turbocharged engine that operated 30, 40,000 feet. And it was the British who married the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine with this airframe and produced probably one of the best aircraft of the war, if not the best all-around combat fighter.
And then Packard, they started building the Merlin engines for ours.
So it was licensed, built to Packard. So all of the engines that you see these days were actually American-built.
I think one of the remarkable things about this thing is what a kill ratio it had, and it didn't even enter the war until 1944. Late 43 or 44.
I think that's the training, but as Mark knows from flying it so much, You take a lower time, and he trained me, so I blame him for my landings. But, you can take somebody who's a lower time pilot, and relative to these two guys, I'm a civilian trained low time guy who flies a desk for a living and not airliners. It was a plane that with a few hundred hours in T6s, you could translate. And, I mean, you see guys training in it all the time.
Yeah, I've done 22 checkouts for guys in the Mustang, and 2 of them are right here today. But it's one of those airplanes that if you could fly the T6 well, the transition to the Mustang is truly just a transition. I'm not actually teaching somebody to fly the airplane. It's just coaching them, is what I call it, into the...
But in all fairness, now these planes that we fly, whether it's Zach in the 86 or either of these planes, they were designed for combat. This wasn't for the Sunday driver that you give a whole lot of buffer in case somebody messes up. You get to the point where this plane, more so the Mustang, but you stall that thing and it'll just bite you hard. So, that's where accidents happen. And we do hear with all that power with both airplanes, a lot of people say, well, gee, you push that throttle forward and doesn't it torque roll? If you're insane, yes, but nobody's trained to do that. I will tell you, my first flight in the Corsair was out of Mark's personal airport, beautiful grass strip in upstate New York that has a little bit of a hill that I call Mount Everest. He calls it a hill. And I've never really hesitated after good training to fly an airplane. You can't see anything over that nose. The airport sort of pinches in with big, tall trees on either side. And I hesitated. I said, what am I doing here? Yeah. And one of the few planes where he finally said, you know what, just push it forward and we'll make it happen. And that was my first Corsair flight.
Well, what do you guys, give me the typical armament this would have in the escort, as an escort. Of course, it'd be completely different than the air-to-ground work.
It was an effective air-to-ground, but it had the weakness of a water-cooled or a radiator. And, one lucky shot and your day is ruined. A plane like this, you could take out a cylinder, and there's all kinds of stories that they would still make it back to the carrier. A typical combat mission, and I'll tell you first now, Mark's, only 25. I'm a little bit older than that. You sit in this plane. We were flying up here yesterday from down south, and after 2 hours, you were ready to jump out of the thing if we weren't landing soon. So these young guys who were flying 5, 6, 7 hours to Berlin and back, just incredible. But a typical loadout was drop tanks to have the fuel to make it as far as you could, and then 6 50 caliber machine guns that just a tremendous punch to it.
Well, now they had completely different missions, but I'll put you on the spot. Which did you like best?
For me, it's the Mustang. I've got 1,200 hours in a P-51. It's home for me. I just love flying it.
Most people that flew 51 don't say that.
It is. I get to fly a lot of different ones.
I love that Corsair.
He loves the Corsair.
Such a beast. You can open the canopy. Yeah. The only thing is I get older, climbing up and down in that cockpit and that dripping radial engine. The Mustang, I'll grant it, is a little more
and we
refined.
have both fallen off the wing before, which
hey, you're not supposed to
I
tell
know.
that
It's,
story.
How about the
slippery.
difference in the A, B, C, and D on the 51?
So I've flown the B and the C and the D. I've not flown the A model, but pretty much the same. Stall characteristics are different on the B and the C. That's the, I've done some training in them, and I've had twice where the student actually pulled a little too hard on the top of a loop, and the airplane unhooked, and we did a half of a snap roll on the top of a loop, which that'll get your attention in any airplane, especially a P-51.
And the earlier, the visibility.
The visibility was not as good as it is with the bubble canopy. It had the canopy with the side door that would latch, and one time we had that unlatch during flight, which again, that kind of stuff gets your attention, where the new bubble canopy, you just roll it forward, and great visibility, great flying airplane.
Zach, let's talk a little bit about this F-80C, everybody's favorite airplane.
It is my favorite airplane.
Well, it is a lot of people. The 51 and the 86. But tell us about the airplane, a little bit of specs on it, range on it, thrust, whatever.
Well, the book says it'll go about 1,000 miles when it has the big drop tanks. We got the small drop tanks on here, the 120-gallon drop tanks. With the 200-gallon drop tanks, it's supposed to go about 1,000. We just got this out of restoration about 60 days ago, so we're taking baby steps up to really find out what the range of the aircraft would be. We've flown it 400, 450 at lower altitudes and are working our way up. So armament's got 650 cals, which we've have restored. Obviously, they're mock-up guns, but we actually got the feeds and all that stuff.
Why not real stuff?
That ATF, you know.
Well, you're in Florida. So I understand there was 9,800 built. How many do you think are still flying about?
I think the last time I looked, there was 8, and about half those aren't in a position to fly right now. So I think there's 4 in the United States 4 or 5 that are flyable today.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. How about it? Did it serve its mission well?
The F-80C, yes, it did a really good job. In Korea is where it really showed itself. And I want to talk a little bit about the paint job. And
we get
get there in a second.
That's number 6
Oh,
down there.
jumped ahead. Okay.
All right. Well, tell us about it was called the last true dogfighter and what the kill ratio was.
Yeah, the Korean War, I don't remember the kill ratio exactly.
10 to 1.
10 to 1, which is right up there with our other aircraft. And the other question was?
Well, why was it called the last dogfighter, true dogfighter?
No missiles. It has guns, so that's why they call it the last gunfighter.
All right, now let's talk about the paint job and who it's dedicated to.
Okay, it's as we talked about earlier with our foundation, we try to identify a person and the person that flew that aircraft, and then honor that person. George Davis is the person. You'll see his name on the left side of the airplane. He was a Medal of Honor winner and what's called an ace of aces. He was an ace in World War II in the P-51, and he was an ace in the Korean War. By the time that he passed away, he had 21 kills or 21 victories total. And at that time, when he passed away, he was one of the most famous aces of all time during the Korean War. And is actually, if you look up his history, it shows that the Russians, Chinese, and the Koreans were actually gunning for him because of all the publicity he was getting. At that time, we generally the rule was if you became an ace in the Korean War, you were immediately retired and sent back home because now you're a war hero. Well, they didn't want to bring him back because his style and his kill ratio was so high. The story that really impressed us with George Davis was he was engaged in a fight with 15 MiG-15s over Korea. He had got 2 bombers, 1 fighter, and he was returning to base, and one of his buddies was engaged with 2 MiGs on his tail and was getting shot up. He turned, re-engaged, shot one of the MiGs, disengaged the other while 24 MiGs were in pursuit, and he made it back to base, landing on fumes. The citation, the Silver Star citation from that reads 5 gallons on board. And anyone's ever flown a Sabre jet, you don't want to be at 5 gallons, trust me. So we really like that. So the day he became of aces, he was flying misbehaving. So this aircraft, I have to write it down because I can't memorize it. It's a 34th Fighter Squadron, 4th Fighter Wing in the 5th Air Force, misbehaving. This was the we painted this aircraft in honor and matched his paint scheme on that day. So.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the aces. We had 40 aces in Vietnam. I mean, in Korea.
Right.
And 39 of them were in this airplane.
Correct.
I like airplane. Had 1 in the Corsair. And this is just a little bit of information. It was a Navy night fighter. His name was Guy de Bordelon, and he shot down 5 airplanes with that. Okay, thanks, guys. We're going to have a little question and answer here. See if I can get somebody with the mics out here.
Was the Sabre ever used as a ground pounder?
You mean as air to ground? Yes, it could carry 1,000-pound bombs on the outboard wing, up to 1,000-pound bombs. They would use it, but it was mainly an air superiority type fighter.
Well, nothing further. We want to thank you folks. Please show up again at 1 o'clock. We're going to have a good show there. The show at 1 o'clock is about the Navy airplanes that were lost in Lake Michigan. And the guy that recovered it is going to give us a little talk to us and tell us about it. So please show up. Thank you.